At 6:30 a.m., the 27th of August, at the African Development Summit in Addis Ababa, before hundreds of international journalists and dozens of world leaders, Ibrahim Traore took a step almost unheard of in modern politics. He issued a bold, public ultimatum to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. No hedging, no diplomatic sugarcoating, only unshakable resolve. Staring directly into the camera, Traore declared, "Mr. Netanyahu, you have 48 hours to apologize to Africa, or you will no longer be welcome here." It was not a threat of war. It was a strike of dignity, a statement so direct that the conference hall fell silent. Within minutes, clips of the moment began circulating across the world, igniting debates from Johannesburg to Washington. This was not just about one dispute between two leaders. It was about the respect Africa demands and the sovereignty it refuses to bargain away. This diplomatic earthquake did not begin with a speech. It began with a leak. According to multiple diplomatic sources, during a closed-door G7 meeting, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu allegedly made remarks that African leaders considered deeply offensive, particularly targeting Burkina Faso's president, Ibrahim Traore. He was reported to have dismissed them as political opportunists and naive in their criticism of Israel's Gaza campaign. Journalists and diplomats later confirmed that the language used behind closed doors was even harsher, including terms such as crude and militantly theatrical to describe Africa's response. Sources further indicated that Netanyahu even hinted at supporting IMF efforts to tighten debt recovery across African nations, a stance that further heightened diplomatic tensions. Beyond that, he was also said to have floated the idea of creating a new alliance under Western sponsorship tied to the so-called Great Reconstruction 2030 Pact, a suggestion that immediately raised fears of a geopolitical restructuring that could sideline Africa's interests. When the leak broke, outrage swept across African media and social networks. On Africa News, the story dominated the headlines. Within hours, the hashtag number Africa is not your pawn was trending, generating millions of shares. Yet while public anger reached a boiling point, Traore chose silence, a silence that, in hindsight, was deliberate. At the Addis Ababa summit, Traore stepped to the podium with unwavering resolve and proclaimed Africa's dignity. "Mr. Netanyahu, Africa will not be your pawn, nor the subject of debt chains or Western-sponsored experiments. This is not a game of alliances. It is a question of dignity. You have 48 hours to apologize, or you will no longer be welcome on this continent. Not in trade, not in diplomacy, not in the future of history." The room froze. Journalists stopped mid-keystroke. Delegates glanced at one another in disbelief. It was not a threat of violence. It was a challenge of dignity, a direct strike against the imbalance of power that had defined Africa's relationship with the West for decades. In that instant, Burkina Faso was no longer just a nation in West Africa. It became the epicenter of a global conversation about respect, sovereignty, and the future of African diplomacy. The 72-hour countdown began the moment Ibrahim Traore stepped off the podium, and almost instantly, the world reacted. Social media lit up across the continent and beyond. On Africa News, the story dominated the front page. The hashtag number Africa is not your pawn trended globally on X, TikTok, and Facebook, amassing millions of views within the first day. But the reactions weren't just online. From government offices to university campuses, the words of the president of Burkina Faso were repeated, dissected, and celebrated. For many Africans, this was not simply a diplomatic dispute. It was a rare, unfiltered moment of defiance against years of being sidelined in international decision-making. Support quickly poured in. South Africa's foreign minister reposted the viral clip, writing, "Finally, someone said it." The former Kenyan ambassador to the UN added on Twitter, "This is the future of African diplomacy, fearless and incorruptible." These messages showed that Traore's stance had won backing across political and ideological divides. Israel's reaction, by contrast, was muted. Netanyahu's office issued only a short, vague denial of the leaked remarks, avoiding any direct reply to Traore's ultimatum. Instead of easing tensions, this fueled them further. Analysts on Africa News said it confirmed what many Africans have long felt, that their concerns are too often brushed aside rather than addressed seriously. Within 24 hours, the story had grown beyond a headline. It became a rallying cry that united citizens, diplomats, and commentators. For the first time in years, African unity was not just an idea, it was visible, urgent, and real, and the momentum kept building. Across Africa, people embraced Traore's ultimatum as both a symbol and a turning point. In Burkina Faso itself, despite over 2 million people displaced by jihadist violence and more than 60% of the country outside direct government control, Traore was seen as a figure of resistance and hope for unity. Public support for military rule has also surged under his leadership. A recent Afrobarometer survey showed 66% of Burkinabe citizens now accept military rule, compared to only 24% in 2012. His bold challenge to Israel's prime minister captured the imagination of youth and rural communities who increasingly see him as a modern-day Thomas Sankara, a leader ready to restore dignity and independence for Burkina Faso and for Africa as a whole. On the international stage, President Traore's name has become a symbol of open defiance against outside political pressure. Demonstrations in his support broke out not only in Ouagadougou, where thousands shouted, "Long live Captain Traore," but also in cities with large African diaspora communities such as London and Kingston. Protesters waved Burkina Faso's flag and carried banners demanding an end to foreign interference in African affairs. In this tense environment, Traore's 48 hours ultimatum to Prime Minister Netanyahu was more than just a bold statement. It was part of a broader effort to redefine African diplomacy on Africa's own terms. For millions, that ticking clock became a lasting symbol, a demand for respect, dignity, and sovereignty that could reshape the continent's future. The ultimatum quickly spilled beyond diplomatic channels. Within hours, the political and social mood in Burkina Faso and across Africa shifted dramatically. In Ouagadougou, public squares filled with citizens showing support, holding banners reading, "Africa stands with Ibrahim Traore," and "Respect Africa." Student unions from Senegal, Ghana, and Nigeria issued joint declarations urging the African Union to stand with Burkina Faso, and even proposed economic and diplomatic measures against any nation that disrespects African sovereignty. This wave of civic mobilization carried clear political weight. In countries where people are often disengaged from politics due to disappointment with their leaders, the incident reignited a shared sense of purpose. Commentators across African media noted that it crossed religious, ethnic, and regional divides with leaders from Christian, Muslim, and secular states, all agreeing on one principle: African dignity is non-negotiable. In Burkina Faso, the impact was immediate. President Traore, already popular for his nationalist message and reforms, saw his approval ratings rise sharply after the ultimatum. Opposition figures, once vocal critics of his military-led rule, now hesitated, fearing their criticism could be seen as unpatriotic. In a moment of national unity, the African Union, often accused of reacting too slowly, began urgent talks.